Former minister and founder of Something or Other Publishing, Wade Franson, is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society. From messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted throughout our culture, Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture. Joining him are groundbreaking artist and podcaster Jacqueline Clare, whose focus on spiritual realism is summarized by the quote, "When we don't take the high road with our choices and miss the opportunity to develop spiritual qualities, we literally forfeit the purpose of our lives."
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, where we bring on a unique and interesting guest each week to come and explore the role of religion in society. Tonight's topic, as you saw, is leading through inspiration, the role of an artist. And our guest is Sienna Heath, and I will be sharing a little bit about her in a moment. First, I want to invite all of our audience to drop a line in the chat. That is the fun part about a live stream, that we get to interact with you and vice versa. So if you're watching this live, go ahead and drop a hello in the chat so that we know you're out there. And we will be taking a whole segment for questions towards the end, and we want to hear your comments. So be sure to interact with us. For now, yay, there we go. We've got Ithaca, we've got Ralph, our regular here. So I wanted to share a bit about Sienna, who is a wonderful friend of mine. And hello, everyone. I see you guys there. Sienna Heath is a growth writer. She is the star and writer of a short documentary called Real Unity, produced by Free the People and premiered at the Anthem Film Festival at Freedom Fest. She now hosts the podcast Leaving the Left for Liberty on Free the People, where she interviews whistleblowers, dissidents, and other alternative voices in the Western world. Her essays and poetry have been featured in numerous high-profile publications, and locally, she is known as the Quarantine Gardener and known for inspiring Victory Gardens and creating the Hero's Journey worksheet at Turning Point LV to guide survivors of abuse in telling their stories of liberation. We will discuss the evolution of her perspectives on unity, faith, feminism, dissidence, and the potential for art to inspire change in the world like nothing else can. So with that, let us welcome Sienna Heath to the show. Hi.
Thank you. Hi.
Sienna's also a very close friend, so very fun to have her here, and basically like inviting people into one of our discussions. So Sienna, for those in the audience who are not familiar with you yet, can you share a little bit about your background, what it is you do and where you're coming from and what drives you to do it?
Sure. Well, I'm a writer, editor, and now podcaster. And so my main form of art is words. And as many believe, in the beginning was the word. And so debatably, words are actually the first form of co-creation in the divine sense. And when spring, or rather summer 2020 hit, I began to start asking some questions that I didn't really see any of my peers asking around the mainstream approaches to racial justice, or perhaps more aptly, racial revenge. Fair enough, right? And actually, I think that was my first kind of point of contact with people and experiencing some conflict. And what you and I have in common is that we are both, oh, sorry, the train's going by. We're both of mixed race, or mixed ethnicity. I'm half Persian, and my dad is from the US. So among other things, and of course, being the daughter of two artists, I think that does give me a unique perspective.
I would be curious for those watching if 2020 was a year of awakening. You got a lot of trains. Maybe some people can share if 2020 was pivotal for them. Well, you mentioned your parents being artists and also the biracial aspect, and I would imagine the spiritual aspect as well. So that's leading me to want to ask you, like, could you put it in sort of a nutshell, maybe some aspects of your upbringing that you feel prepared you or gave you the perspective that you have now?
Yes, well, particularly my mom is a bit of a free and rebellious spirit. And she was raised in the Baha'i faith in Iran. And as we know, one of the teachings of the Baha'i faith is embracing the independent investigation of truth. And so as creatives, as a family of three, we are quite creative in our own ways and in our own mediums. One of the things that I think was instilled in me really through inspiration and not force, but just like kind of in my atmosphere as a child was claiming the intellectual property of one's mind and even learning to disagree with my mom and dad, but do so in a way that was kind of creative and fun. And even when it's not so creative and fun, just doing it in a way, I think that's kind of like embodying art as a way of being and engaging with the word as a form of co-creation, not conflict.
Claiming the intellectual property of one's own mind, was that something that your parents like taught you, or is that you've poetically put together something later in life that you realized they were teaching you to do?
I poetically put something together actually rather recently when I was in Washington, D.C. I was on a couple of shows in Free the People studio, and these phrases came to mind. I was just giggling at the train of thought banner down below. That was funny.
Yeah. Yeah. We have a comment, just another friend of mine, she mentions that 9/11 was the beginning of an awakening for her, and then 2020 was really the final veil as she knew it. And I think a lot of people feel that way. We've come of age in a very interesting time, and we're very lucky to be alive at a time when I think underbellies are being exposed. There's it's tumultuous, but it's also a time of cleansing and healing. So Sienna, I have a special question for you, and then we're going to cut to commercial break after this one. But Sienna, if everyone in the world would just do this one thing, it would make the world a better place. What is your answer today?
If everyone in the world would embody art as a way of being, then we could co-create a more beautiful world.
Embody art as a way of being. So more on that when we come back from this commercial break.
Hello, and welcome to Something or Other Publishing, or as our friends like to call us, Soup. Soup is a platform that connects authors, readers, and service providers in one convenient place. Choose Soup if you're an author with a great book idea and you're looking for a publisher offering hands-on coaching and some of the best royalties in the business. Or if you're a reader who enjoys engaging with celebrated and emerging authors. We already have over 3,000 of them, and more are joining every day. You can even win free books by voting on their book ideas. Or maybe you're a service provider and you're looking to engage with over 3,000 authors. We're here to help. So whether you're an author, a reader, or a service provider, you're in the right place at Soup. Contact us at help@soupllc.com to learn more.
All right. So Sienna, you said something very interesting right before that break, which was we could create a better world if people embodied art as a way of being. Can you share a little bit more what you mean by that?
Well, Something that comes to mind is I'm going to paraphrase something that's not mine, that I've read here and there, which is that before the existence of any sort of deception or lies, truth did not really exist, because it simply was just existence in the beginning. And now that truth does exist, we know from the Baha'i writings that truthfulness is the foundation for all human virtues. And I think art is a way, through any medium really, or any just like way of being, way of interacting, way of life, like art is a way to almost like sculpt like all the excess and like uncover what's really real and good and true.
Mm-hmm. By co-creating. I guess I'm trying to fill in a little bit. Like, it's such a beautiful concept that art helps us like get to a deeper truth, helps us like cut off the excess marble, to use those from Michelangelo analogy, to get to the truth that's really there. Do you feel that all forms of artwork can do that, and expression?
I think that they can. I mean, some artists are more deliberate about it. Like they might call themselves activists, or be trying, like you've said, like you are trying to activate something in the human spirit, and like you're conscious about that to some extent. Whereas some other artists, I don't think that they need to be conscious of it to actually make it happen. And what's happening is, or what I see happen with artists is like each one opens themselves up to the divine, and they are now a vessel for the divine. So it's like there are things that come through. That's happened for me occasionally too, where things come through and I don't even want to claim them as mine. Like it's just like a bigger truth and a bigger beauty that I've been blessed with.
That's beautiful. And I can relate to that. Well, what about for people listening to you who are inspired, but they're an accountant, like they haven't dedicated themselves to an artistic path, or they don't think they're talented in that way. How can they participate in this embodiment that you're talking about?
Oh, I love that. I mean, I can kind of relate, because as a writer, we kind of are like in the middle on that, where like, yes, we're artists, but also like kind of in a like a little bit more grounded, practical way of like, pen on paper. And you can, with words, you can go anywhere from like, accounting, or like, going on about just basic facts, to like co-creating beauty. So anyone who's just like an accountant or someone out there, well, art is a way of being. Like you never have to like put pen to paper to write a poem or paint a painting, or you don't have to do any of that. But like in your life, if you're like mindfully co-creating meaningful relationships, and like you're opening yourself up to a certain like humility to something that's greater than yourself, that's enough.
That's awesome. That's beautiful. Yeah, opening up to something greater than yourself. That's a good key thing to hold on to. Opening up to something greater than yourself. Well, speaking of practical, I did want to invite the audience into this little journey that I've witnessed of yours, and I wanted to see a little bit where you are now. So I think we have a pretty interesting story. Briefly, the part with me, and then we're going to move more to your story. We first met because you contacted me in response to a podcast I had done called New World Order versus Divine Civilization.
Yes, I literally Googled that, and you were the only Baha'i I could find out there who was openly questioning.
Yeah, and the fact that was even a search term that you were using, shows a interesting balance of like a spiritual perspective and also an awareness of negative forces in the world, and like trying to reconcile that. So maybe we might touch on that a little bit, but where I really wanted to go with this was to share that we met in person at Freedom Fest 2021 in South Dakota, and you were there having this wonderful honor, having this, I think it was a premiere. It was a high-profile screening of your documentary, Real Unity, and where you had this very beautiful call for less polarization. You say that it's warm at the equator, you know, and it's cold out there in the polarized ideologies. So you have this beautiful documentary calling for real unity. And I think there's an interesting story of how you even made that movie in the first place. And then I witnessed, you know, some audience members expressing like a knee jerk to the word unity, like, because it seems like maybe they're being forced to accept things they don't want to accept or something like that, like unify with people that they don't want to unify with. Anyway, I feel like I'm rambling, but so basically you got a little bit of flack, and it was really challenging for you because by that point of the premiere, you were already relating more to the upset audience member than to your own film. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. Yeah.
Yeah. And then let's see, then you started your podcast, Leaving the Left for Liberty, and you've interviewed all these interesting whistleblowers and dissidents and artists, people who are trying to make change in the world and speak out. And you were, of course, invited to this Freedom Fest again this last year. And you decided not to go as a matter of integrity because they were overly permissive, right? Like they have this anything goes attitude, which included having a man on a woman's voice panel and stuff. We see honey in the background.
Yes.
So all of that to say, you've had this interesting journey in the last 2 years, I guess, that I've known you, a year and a half. And art has been this pivotal part of it. The writing, the movie, the podcast, and through it all, you have been evolving as well in your perceptions on the world and stuff. So I'm going to take a breath and stop talking and ask you a little bit about where you are now in that evolving trajectory. Starting from real unity to where we are now.
Yeah, I'd like to reflect a bit on the summary that you just provided, which is really helpful for me to have that from an outside friend perspective. Yeah, during the screening, after the screening, during the panel, I was really relating to the woman who was like almost wanting to fight me. I was like, I also don't really want unity either. Like it's not so much that I was calling for unity. I was envisioning what real unity could be like in the future. I was just as, like, in some ways, just as, like, pessimistic and annoyed and irritated as this woman in the audience who stood up and said, I don't want unity. Like, I was really at Freedom Fest, like, avoiding a certain gathering at home in my native Pennsylvania. Like, I was over in South Dakota, like, escaping, like, you know, whatever unity I was invited to in my area. I wasn't ready to unify with some people in my life either. Sorry, I'm getting kind of worked up about that. And so I actually kind of appreciated the tension during that panel, because otherwise it kind of would have been a very vanilla kind of panel, like kumbaya, let's all come together. And I thought it was really fascinating. And I honestly felt kind of energized by it. So soon after, in having, William says maybe they think that unity is sameness, not unity and diversity. Right. So in the film, I evoked a Baha'i metaphor of humanity being flowers of one garden. And granted, we're not all roses. I'm not going to label who's what, but you know, we're not all roses, and some of us might be the dirt and some of us might be the bugs. I don't know. But regardless, we're not all the same. And I still think the film was beautiful, and I think it was beautiful, like aesthetically beautiful, meaningful, and I'm proud of it. But I really don't feel like it represents where I'm at now. And I'm almost kind of embarrassed to share it with people. Like, it's weird because it's like, of course, they're probably going to find it if they want to watch it. And I encourage you to watch it. But keep in mind that by the summer and the fall following that film, I started the podcast Leaving the Left for Liberty. And in the Baha'i writing, Shoghi Effendi does warn that the movement of the left will be really instrumental in the downfall of the old order. I could bring up the writing now, or we could put it in the show notes later, but it's very explicit that the movement of the left is more instrumental in the downfall than the movement of the right. I don't know why, but many of us have seen the groupthink that happened on the left, and yes, it happens on the right as well. But I just found the movement of the left to be more institutionalized. It was like it seemed like almost in every school and every medical establishment, science, just everywhere you looked, there was the movement of the left. And eventually, while I really wanted to be an apolitical force, and I still consider myself to be, I did stand against something to stand for values that I appreciate. But interestingly, I don't think that everyone's interpretation of the movement of the left, or rather Leaving the Left for Liberty, which is the title of my show, is really how I interpret it. Like, the movement of the left is a culture. I don't care about politicians. I don't actually follow politics all that much. I follow it enough to be informed. But I was looking more at the culture of the groupthink that was forming, and eventually the complete delusion that men could be women and women can be men, which is just completely false. So I was looking at the culture. I was looking at how artists were being silenced. I mean, like, even just to write a subversive poem, like, you can risk losing friends, or you could, especially earlier in the 2020s. And I was looking for, yes, creative liberty and liberty to speak and co-create with my words. But I wasn't looking for liberty to lie. And there's a difference between someone having the right to lie and then almost being forced to celebrate that lie and live that lie with them. And I had a few different reasons for not going to Freedom Fest, but one of them was that I wasn't able. I'll turn this on myself, actually, because I don't want to point fingers, but I will say, for me, I wasn't able to hold my center and my grace in an environment that was embracing the biggest delusion of our time, and probably of humanity in general. The delusion that men can be women and women can become men, and that that's a matter of intellectual dishonesty. And then furthermore, it leads to the immorality of celebrating the mutilation of children. So it just, for me, was a deal breaker. And kind of ironically, within a year, I went from being the real unity girl to embracing a rugged sort of individualism that even couldn't find a home at something called Freedom Fest.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel that hosting the podcast changed you? Did it prepare you to put your foot down the next year at Freedom Fest? Was there any connection there?
Definitely it did. I do want to emphasize, I really love a lot of what they do. And that's actually why I want to say anything at all. I actually stay quiet about a lot of things because I kind of have no hope for certain people and organizations, but I love a lot of what they do. And actually part of what they did is like give me the confidence to find my words and my bearings and stand up for what I believe is good, right, and true. And I connected with quite a few of my podcast my podcast guests at Freedom Fest the previous year, like several folks from Project Veritas, like they came on my show, and I'm still in touch with a few who want to come on this year. I met Amala Ekbanobi, and I just like adore her. We met her together, actually. We have a picture together. So it's kind of like a paradox, right? Because it's like, well, in a way I felt repelled, but like also in a way I felt emboldened, and they were a part of why I felt so emboldened to actually stand my ground and decide what that would look for me moving forward. And I'm still figuring that out.
Mm-hmm. We have some discussion about in the chat, sort of parsing what does left mean. And Arthur says the left calls for the dissolution of old, as in conservative institutions, structures, and ideas, or moral. It creates chaos, which is bad. There's always a place for, we were talking about the world kind of going through this exposure, which leads to a cleansing and a healing. So sometimes things falling away is good, but it's chaotic while it's happening. And it's also not necessarily something we want to be purposely creating destruction. I think of left as collectivism versus the individual, and that's something else that you've talked about the courage to come forth as an individual, which seems like something that's controversial these days for some reason. I was hoping maybe you could speak to that a little bit, why it's about stepping out as an individual and its importance in this day.
Yeah, stepping out as an individual and the tension between individualism and collectivism. I think there's a pretty simple way of describing how I feel about individualism and collectivism. A collective exists, like humanity exists, and we can't really deny that we are one in some ways. It's kind of annoying, but it's true. And for me, like, I'm not a collectivist. I don't adhere to collectivism because I get the sense that collectivism is a top-down approach, whereas individualism, with each person coming around to their own spiritual awakening in their own time, and all of those individuals coming together as flowers of one garden, if you will, rising up and creating a more beautiful world, and eventually coming together as a meaningful collective, is how I see the process happening in a productive and probably chaotic way. And regarding stepping out as an individual, well, I want to say we are in a time of mass delusion, but we've probably been in times like this before. We're in a time of mass delusion, like the fact that people think men can become women, and they're putting pronouns in their bios when all you have to say is common/sense. We're in a time where it actually, in a way, like, isn't that hard to stand out as an individual. Like, you kind of just have to stick to basic truths and values. It's kind of bizarre, actually, because, like, in the 60s, from what I've been told, like, you were like a hippie or like eventually like a punk rocker, like that was the way of standing out as an individual, is to be as like shocking and avant-garde as possible. But nowadays, standing up as an individual oftentimes just means like being kind of socially conservative actually, and not being ashamed to say so.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I take it from who you interview and the way you live and stuff that you feel like it's pretty important that people do so.
Yes. I will admit that I do lack patience in that area. But I think it's really beautiful and brave. And maybe it's funny because like some people I've interviewed on my show don't like being called brave. So I'm like, I don't know what to call it, but it's beautiful and it stands out. And it actually seems, no matter how many people I connect with who are standing firm and speaking what they believe to be good, right, and true, no matter how many people I connect with in this way, I'm always craving more. So it's like, even if it's not rare per se, I love it, and the more the merrier.
Right on. Right on. Well, we have an exciting request in the chat, but I think we're going to cut to a commercial break and then we will get to that.
Bursting with joy on every page.
an illustrated handbook of spiritual truths to help children learn lifelong gems of guidance, who we truly are, how to live, how to pray, how to treat others. Enjoyed by children and families around the world, inspiring meaningful conversations, powerful self-images, good habits, devotion, courtesy, truthfulness, friendship, Noble Beings Spiritual Handbook for Children of All Ages, a special collection of wisdom from the Baha'i writings, illustrated by spiritual realism painter Jacqueline Clare, empower children of all ages to be the noble beings they are meant to be. Available in hardback, paperback, and ebook on Amazon. It gets a little meta. So yes, William has asked this question that I wanted to get to anyway. As the daughter of an artist from Iran, he asked, "What do you think about the revolution in Iran with women leading the way? Too much or not the right form?" Maybe he means here, but no, it's not too much. We're very happy for this question, and this is something we wanted to talk about and what's going on there, the chant, and your take on it, given your mom and your upbringing.
The chant is Woman, Life, Freedom, or Zan Zendagi Azadi. And to connect it to the previous part of our conversation, I've been thinking about what woman, life, freedom means within the socio-political context of the US and Iran. And interestingly, men, women, and children in Iran are coming together and chanting woman, life, freedom. Whereas in the US, it's quite controversial to simply state that a woman is an adult human female and when life begins, and state what freedom means to you as an individual. Even advocating for freedom of speech has become controversial or labeled not so kindly. And then to reflect on what this means for Iranians, or what I've been observing, it's really miraculous to watch, especially artists like poets and musicians, write these subversive songs and speak these subversive poems, and really all a woman has to do is take her hair down and show how beautiful she looks with her hair blowing in the wind, which is a form of art and beauty and bravery as well. And I do think that as Iranians stand up one by one, embodying art as a way of being, I am hopeful that we'll see the Islamic regime on its last legs.
Why do you think there is that disconnect? Like, why are we struggling to uphold these basic truths or moral principles, and people in other parts of the world are championing them?
I wonder if it has something to do with us being a young country. In the roots of ancient Persia, I know especially of Kurdish women, they have a history of being literal warriors, going to war. And there's the imagery of Khorshid Khanum, the lady sun. And so what it means to be a female and to be a woman is rooted really deeply in Persian culture. And I'm not sure if we really have the same strength in our roots here in the US. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. That maybe it has something to do with our youth. William says maybe we took the equality of men and women too literally, which is interesting. And I would invite anyone else who's watching, our audience, to share their thoughts on this if you have any. And other people may not see all of the chat, but we can see it. So go ahead and drop your thoughts. I'm not evading your question, Sienna. I was just wondering, like, well, what does it mean in Iranian culture? Like, if they have an understanding of and a celebration culturally of what it means to be a woman, is that, if that's more or less what you said? What is that? Is sort of a Matt Walsh question. What is that celebration?
What is that? That's an adult human.
What is their
What?
understanding?
What is their understanding? Well, it's an adult human female. I'll never get tired of saying that. My mom was just telling me that overall she sees women being more like forces of nature and in a way more vocal in their marriages than American women are, or westernized women in general. And there was actually a comment that came through on my Facebook when the protests were starting in Iran last year. And this fellow said, like, well, like, what is this psyop? Since when do Iranian women want to become westernized? And I was like, oh, no. Like their history of maybe what you might consider feminism, or just like women standing in their strength, and in their ability to literally fight, and to like really like guide the story of their families. Like, I mean, not my mom, I would say, is like pretty like prominent parent in our household. And as I understand, many Iranian women are. I mean, they're still very feminine and nurturing, of course, but there seems to be like a firmness that comes through, I think, in a dignified way. Like in the US, we have like, no offense, but like the crazy blue-haired feminists, like that's our version of like firm, you know. But what I see among Iranian women is more of like a steadfast strength, if that answers your question.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. It's interesting because I would say people who have not been exposed so intimately with that culture wouldn't see that or understand that, because, you know, since the revolution, they're covered and everything. So it seems like they don't have a voice, but you're saying that traditionally they do have a voice, at least within the home, and it's very strong. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Something else I wanted to hear a little bit more about is just the role of creative activity, you know, contributing to this journey of awakening that you've had, and of lifting your voice and stuff. Like how creating has contributed to the evolution of your own thought. Would you say that that's accurate, and that they kind of go hand in hand?
Yeah, they do go hand in hand. One project I did for Free the People, well after Real Unity, was a poem called The Trampled Woman. That's a short film on our channel. And it's a poem that I wrote about an Indigenous woman who was also disabled. She was trampled at Canada's Freedom Convoy by the police officers that were riding their horses and shutting the mostly peaceful protest down. And it was just really heartbreaking. And that was just something that like I watched over and over again. And as someone who didn't get a COVID shot, and regardless, just really appreciates the sacredness of the human vessel, it was very symbolic for me, for anyone watching. Like, I think it was also symbolic that she was Indigenous too, and that she was a woman, and that she was she had a walking assist device. Like, there was something really like crushing about someone who was so genuine and also vulnerable to have been treated as such. And I do feel like she was a symbol for many of us who had been fighting that fight, defeating the mandates, some of which are still in place. And yeah, I mean, along the lines of co-creation, I guess I just felt really called rather quickly, actually. It was like a day or two later, I wrote the poem, and it was done. It just came through, and I just felt really called to memorialize that moment. And thankfully she survived, and that's good.
Oh, that's good. I didn't know that. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Texan mentions that there's a war on God in all religions and nations, and that the introduction of feminism into Iran is a branch of that effort to erase God, which is interesting. I think it's in reference to the blue-haired feminism, I'm guessing.
Well, yeah, I would agree if the Texan here is is referencing blue-haired feminism or intersectional feminism, which invites the delusion that men can be women. I would agree that that is a version of erasing God, and I do acknowledge that that's come in to Iranian culture in part. But women fighting for their right to wear a veil or not wear a veil, maybe that can be called feminism. But it's, I would say that that's a fundamental human right, and it's a very godly thing to do, to advocate for your fellow person.
For sure. Definitely. Personally, I have a hard time with words like feminism and stuff, because sadly, it's almost like unity. These words that have mean different things to different people, and they've gone on to have these different things. Does that mean the emancipation of women, which is what Tahirih, the famous early Baha'i, said when she took off her veil and then she was executed, and said, "You can kill me, but you can't stop the emancipation of women"? Or is feminism a polarization where it turns men and women against each other, which is another extreme of how the word could be interpreted, I think we need new words, or we need to reclaim them, or be very clear about what we mean.
Yeah.
Right. That's one of the challenges of this day and age, right? It's like we have conversations with people, and it's like, well, when you say man, do you mean man, or do you mean, like, it's hard to even talk to people because our words have so many different meanings, and they're so, everything is so heightened and triggered,
Yeah, true.
Yeah. Well, it's time for another quick commercial break, and then I have another exciting question that I want to ask you when we get back. In the chat, Sabrina mentioned that the term New World Order has also been hijacked, and the meaning of it, perhaps like in the sacred writings or the Guardian's writings in the Pi Faith, is not the same as the Davos version, So the question I wanted to ask you, when I invited you to the show and I said the theme is exploring the role of religion in society, one of the first things that came to your mind is that potential hypocrisy that travels through so-called religion, and just if you had any thoughts on the potential hypocrisy of religion versus the danger of a completely irreligious world where a transgressive consent in all things culture is accepted. And I think also you being the daughter of an Iranian, and living in America, where there's things that you wish there would be more resistance against, like we put our foot down a woman is a woman, a man is a man. But then also this in Iran, it's like too far, right? The moral police, and no one can live a free life. So I'm giving you sort of a jumbled question, but sort of this the space between these extremes of hypocrisy and transgressiveness, and also like moral police versus not.
Well, one thing that's in our laws here in the West, that's a matter of morality, is essentially thou shalt not kill, that you'll be prosecuted if you murder someone, right? And at times I've heard people use the argument, well, you can't legislate morality. I'm like, well, we already have.
With the commandments, you mean?
Well, no, we haven't legislated the commandment itself, but that murder is wrong and you should be prosecuted for it. That's a matter of morality, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's as simple as just saying you can't legislate morality and you can just do whatever you want. And as long as the other person consented to this crime or whatever, like, then it's okay. No. I really struggle. Honestly, I don't know how much I struggle with it. The fact is, child mutilation is wrong, and people whose brains have not been fully developed, which usually happens around age 25, they cannot consent. They cannot engage in informed consent. I feel like I should be more prepared to like just say it how it is, but like this is how it is. And I guess when it's a matter of like both intellectual dishonesty and immorality, that's when my ears perk up. You know, it's one thing, like I don't know any like fact or science behind wearing veils. You know, it's just like, well, that's just a matter of morality or immorality or whatever it is you think is right. You know, okay. But when it comes to something that's like involving both intellectual dishonesty and immorality, then that's when I'm like, I think maybe we should have a conversation about this and maybe legislate some things. I don't know. I'm not really one for politics, but I will say that much of what I was experiencing in the summer before the recent uprising in Iran was reflecting on the existence of the morality police in Iran, in my mom's native country, and not wanting to become kind of a form of that myself. I don't know. I really struggle with it. I'm kind of looking to you for some guidance because it's something that you and I talk about so much privately, and I still don't really have an answer for it. I actually would turn to the hidden words from the Baha'i writings. Do you mind if I read one really quick?
Please, that'd be great.
O friend, in the garden of thy heart plant not but the rose of love, and from the nightingale of affection and desire loosen not thy hold. Treasure the companionship of the righteous and eschew all fellowship from the ungodly. O son of dust, beware. Walk not with the ungodly and seek not fellowship with him, for such companionship turneth the radiance of the heart into an infernal fire. So on bookmarks, we often see the beginning of that. In the garden of thy heart, plant not but the rose of love. So pretty. But there's more. Eschew all fellowship from the ungodly. Why? Not just because it's unpleasant to interact with them, but because such companionship turneth the radiance of the heart into infernal fire.
What do you think? What do you think that may mean?
Perhaps inflaming a very destructive anger that can turn into rage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. What about the extreme when, you know, like the hypocrisy that can sometimes come with trying to mandate morality?
I don't know what the answer is.
Mhm.
Can you give me an example that's coming to mind for you of hypocrisy and that comes through legislating morality?
I probably shouldn't. I could, but I shouldn't. No,
Why?
because then I think I would be too specific. I'd be too specific with certain places in the world and governments and
Okay.
stuff like that. I don't know. I'm getting cold feet with it.
Okay. I so actually what I get from reading those hidden words is eschewing fellowship means creating communities and really building the new world, the new earth that's already being birthed by God. I think we've been in the birthing process for quite some time. And now those of us who are seeing through the illusions, it's time for us to step up, connect with one another, and create conscious communities where we are skewing fellowship, yes, but we're creating a more beautiful world that will become so attractive, likely maybe to everyone else, that they will eventually cross over and join us. And maybe that's where we'll have the real unity that I was envisioning.
That's really beautiful. Stepping up to create conscious communities, which may involve some element of eschewing fellowship elements that you don't feel are savory or contributing to the well-being of children or the higher good of the communities. I think it's for each individual to make those calls for themselves, like what is ungodly for you, like what sparks something that feels very negative inside of you. um, it's we each walk a spiritual path on our own, like these are decisions that have to be made, and they aren't easy ones necessarily, but it's to nurture that connection with our creator, which is individualism, honoring your own individual capacity and responsibility.
Yeah, and when I start to discern what is ungodly, I try to turn inward and ask myself, am I able to cultivate godly virtues in the presence of this thing or this person? And if not, then it's time to say goodbye.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Very interesting. We have a few moments left, and I want to invite anyone to ask questions in the chat. We'll see if anything pops up, something you want to ask Sienna or me, but mostly Sienna, based on something she said or her work or any interesting ideas. As we're waiting for that, Sienna, I know earlier someone was wanting to hear that quote about, let's see, we'll do this since it popped up. I think it means absolutely don't go along with people and movements lacking integrity and honesty. I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb. I said it's kind of up for the individual, but if something lacks integrity and honesty, that's a pretty good sign. Yeah. So we had a request earlier for that quote about the movements of the left, and I was trying to put it in the private chat, and it got all jumbled. So maybe Sienna can read it for us.
I got it. It's a bit of a long one, but I'm gonna get through it.
And let me just give a little bit of context real quick, because we have a really diverse audience here, and Sienna and I are both grew up in the Baha'i faith, and this quote is, I think it might be a few different people in it, but the primary source is from the 30s, I think, from Shoghi Effendi, who's known as the guardian of the faith. And maybe he's quoting in here some other people like Abdul Baha, but I just wanted to give that context.
Thank you. The violent derangement of the world's equilibrium, the trembling that will seize the limbs of mankind, the radical transformation of human society, the rolling up of the present-day order, the fundamental changes affecting the structure of government, the weakening of the pillars of religion, the rise of dictatorships, the spread of tyranny, the fall of monarchies, the decline of ecclesiastical institutions, the increase of anarchy and chaos, the extension and consolidation of the movement of the left, the fanning into the flame of the smoldering fire of racial strife, the development of infernal engines of war, the burning of cities, the contamination of the atmosphere of the earth. These stand out as the signs and portents that must either herald or accompany the retributive calamity which, as decreed by him who is the judge and redeemer of mankind, must sooner or later afflict a society which, for the most part, and for over a century, has turned a deaf ear to the voice of God's messenger in this day. A calamity which must purge the human race of the dross of its age-long corruptions, and weld its component parts into a firmly knit, world-embracing fellowship. A fellowship destined, in the fullness of time, to be incorporated in the framework and to be galvanized by the spiritualizing influences of a mysteriously expanding, divinely appointed order, and to flower, in the course of future dispensations, into a civilization the like of which mankind has at no stage in its evolution witnessed.
Wow. It starts with such despair, and it sounds like such an accurate description of the times in which we live. And then it ends so beautifully, though, and it's really galvanizing and exciting. At no stage has humankind ever witnessed something like this. That's amazing. And just if our friend is still watching who had asked for it, so the reference looks like Messages to the Baha'i World, 1950, 1957, by Shoghi Effendi. And I think there's several places where he mentions that movement of the left. So we have a cool question here. So how does an artist maintain creativity, the willingness to make mistakes, but still not trying to go too far? Maybe that's a reference to the transgressive, like, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but that consensual things, maybe not going too far. And also, how do you maintain the respect for your peers in this day and age?
My eye is drawn to the second question because that's a tough one. But respect of your peers as an artist in your field. Jacqueline, would you like to tackle this one?
Well, I mean, I think very few people are just like, do your respect in general. Like, I think the respect comes from the quality of their work and their integrity and their honesty. And if they don't uphold that, then I don't think that there's any pressure to respect them. And I'm no longer in a field that is exclusively collaborative. I'm a recovering actor, so I really get to choose who I work with. And I would say that was a big reason why I left acting, because it was too challenging. There's too much that I didn't respect. So I guess I don't concern myself too much with trying to maintain respect.
Yeah, and that goes back to like creating conscious communities of artists and people in general, with whom you do share a mutual respect and mutual regard.
Yeah, that makes it easy. What about maintaining creativity? It's just maybe like as a general question, how do you maintain creativity, the willingness to make mistakes? Another context for that might be interesting is as you grow and you become more well-known and respected, it's sort of like the stakes for mistakes are higher, so how have you navigated that willingness to keep pushing yourself when there's more people listening and reading and watching?
Honestly, I find it kind of energizing and encouraging. When I started my podcast, the question that I asked is what motivates someone to step out as an individual, and how many of us are there? And I think I was asking the second question out of loneliness. Honestly, I always feel so vulnerable using that word, but like, in the early like parts of the 2020s, I really wondered like how many of us are there, because it seems like it's relatively few. But more and more, like most of my guests are creatives in some way, and more I feel very encouraged and inspired by the increase in numbers of viewers and readers and guests themselves. I don't feel like, I think I felt more pressure when I felt like I was like the only one somehow.
That's great. You're actually building that mindful community around yourself. And I think that's the beauty of it. Even if you're not a podcaster with a platform, the more that you align your life with what you actually believe, and the more you speak out about it, there may be a shedding of certain relationships or ties, but then there's this rebuilding for a really strong community, which is amazing. Sienna, we are about to wrap up, and I would like you to share, how can people find you? Your coordinates, what are the best ways for people to stay connected to you?
Well, my coordinates are a secret. But they can find me on Facebook and Instagram as Sienna May Heath. My most active Instagram accounts are The Quarantined Gardener and Sovereign Sienna. That's Sovereign_Sienna. You'll find a picture of me in red I'm wearing a red dress and speaking into a microphone. And also my website is Quarantine Gardener. And you can find my podcast, Leaving the Left for Liberty, on Free the People.
Very nice. Very nice. And next week on Created in the Image of God, I will be interviewing Daniel Sanderson of Plank Sip, who is one of the producers of this show. And we will be talking about the future anthologies coming to Created in the Image of God. So thank you everyone who was with us live today. That was really fun and enriching. Thank you for your comments. And Sienna, thank you so much for being here. This was an adventure and it was fun.
Yes, thank you.
Good night, everyone.